Welcome to 365 Brothers, the podcast. Have you wondered who are the Black men that you pass on the street every day? What are their lives like? Well, in this podcast, we have an in-depth conversation with Black men from all across America and all walks of life. Listen to their stories, their experiences, their wisdom. I'm your host, Robin Shine. Get comfy. Today, we're speaking to a gentleman who knows about service. He is a double retiree. He served in the United States Navy for 20 years, and after retiring, he also served as a pastor with his spouse of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And one of the things I love about this gentleman that you're about to meet is that he and his wife have motorcycled across the United States. There are a couple states left to hit, but they have been long distance traveling for about 12 years. And that is just pretty awesome. And so let me introduce you to William Hamilton, who goes by Ham. Welcome, Ham.
Well, good morning. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you. Before we get into the questions, is there anything that you would like to share about yourself so the listeners can get to know you better?
So I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, raised in Detroit. I'm 71 years old, and my wife, Victoria, and I have been married in November. This coming November will be 51 years.
Wow.
So we got a little time together. 2 adult children. I like to say my son, William, was born in Japan, and my daughter, Stephanie, was made in Japan, but born in Hawaii. Because my wife was 7 months pregnant when we moved from Japan to Hawaii with military. And both of us are just recently retired. October of 2019, we retired from 23 years history with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And so we're still trying to balance out what this retirement thing looks like for us. The other thing that I want to add is that being that I'm 71 years old, I was born in 1949. I know that's a long time. That's way back in the day for some folks. But I grew up in a multiple of time, remembering that space travel was just growing up. I was actually born right at the end of the Korean conflict. And then into the coming years of Vietnam, and also I sat through or was in Detroit when the riots happened in 1967. And that was part of the things that helped me move on with my life, take some different directions. So,
can you say a little bit more about that? When you say those things helped you move on with your life, what do you mean?
A lot going on in my life in the early 60s. My dad was diagnosed schizophrenic. And so we were dealing with that in a household. Both my parents worked. My dad worked for the post office. And my mom worked, I can't remember at that time where she was working, but she's always been a working mom. I was struggling with dad being sick, and I was like 13, 14 years old and in high school. And so at 16, I dropped out of high school wanting to join the Navy. Had a real hard talk with my parents about that. And but in the meantime, once I did that, in the early 67, and then I went to work for Chrysler, which was, and I couldn't see myself, first of all, staying in the automobile manufacturing, doing the same thing 8 hours a day for years and years and years. And that's pretty much what people did in my neighborhood. And so the riots of 1967 hit Detroit and was just quite a turmoil. And I didn't live too far from a place called Belle Isle, which is an island in Detroit. It was a recreational place, but at the foot of that bridge that went across the Isle was a naval reserve station, and they had a ship there, and I would pass that ship almost every day. Say, I need to do something. I don't want to live this life where I'm coming out of the factory at 50 or 60 years old, where I've been doing the same thing for all those years, and on my way to high school, going and coming. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to join the Navy. So my parents agreed that I could join the Navy if I promised to finish school. And so I joined the Navy and got my GED. And those two things for that year really sort of set me on a new pathway, new trajectory.
Got it. Yeah. Great.
Then I fell in love and proposed to this lady that's married to me now. She was 16 years old. I was 18, and her mom said, absolutely not.
Wow. Okay. So I'm guessing you got married since you went into the Navy right after high school. She's 16, you're 18. You guys married while you were in the Navy.
Yeah, 2 years later. We were engaged for 2 years. So her mom, and rest her soul, one of the things that we agreed between the two of us was that we wanted to make sure we went into this with everybody's blessings with this marriage. So we got engaged, but her mom said, okay, look, you're too young to get married. My daughter has to finish high school. She's got to continue with her education. She has to get a job. And this was the clincher, because her mom was slick. Her dad and her mom had been divorced for a few years, but my wife's dad was in the Air Force.
Okay.
So my mother-in-law at that point said, and you can't get married until you make E4, because I know how much people make in the military. And I said, okay. So what she was thinking, though, in the Air Force, it would take like 9 years for people to make like E4. So she figures it's a long time. And 2 years later, I called home. I was out in California. I called my wife, girlfriend at that time. I said, can I speak to your mom? And she said, sure. And she came to her. She said, what is it? I said, well, we agreed that there would be 4 things that we had to accomplish before we could get married. Your daughter graduated from high school. She did that. She continued her education, and she also got a job. I said, the other thing was to make E4. And I just want you to know the results just came out, and I just made E4. And she screamed. And that was in June 1969. We got married in November 1969. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. That's a beautiful story. And obviously, to be that young and be that clear about, 1, wanting everyone's blessing, 2, being willing to have that conversation with your future mother-in-law and come to an understanding and an agreement. And then what I love is how you managed that agreement. Like you were ticking them off.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you clearly knew what you were doing, because you guys have been married for 50 something years. So that's a really beautiful story. I appreciate you sharing it with us. So let's go ahead and get in the questions.
Okay.
Cam, what's your favorite song, either now or all time, and why?
My favorite song is Song for My Father by Horace Silver. It's a jazz piece. The reason is, I told you my dad, when I was probably 11 years old, we started to figure out that there was something going on with him, and it turned out that he had schizophrenia. But my dad was a jazz enthusiast, to the tune of, when my dad passed away in 97, I packed up all his jazz albums, and there was over 2,000 jazz albums. And I'm talking about from all the way from the beginning. He was so aware of music. He was a drummer, and he worked at the post office. So sometimes at night he would go to different clubs and drum a little bit with folks. But he was so well versed that you could ask my dad, "Dad, who is that?" And he'd say, "Oh, that's Sonny Stitt on saxophone, and so is playing the bass, and so is playing, and he made this album. And so that's, he was so intense about that.
You're saying basically like if I had, put a song on, pretty much any jazz song on, and I didn't
Yeah.
say a word about it, he could listen and not only know the song and who the main musician was, but everyone playing each instrument.
Backed him up. It's so much so, there was a DJ in Detroit called Ed Love who had the jazz program there. He would borrow my dad's albums and then call my dad, would go down there and sit down there at the radio station with him. And my dad would quiz him on things. Well, Bill, tell me about, such and such and such. And he was just, it was amazing, this knowledge that he had of jazz. He loved jazz. And even in his illness, most of the time, that's what he did. He sat in the front room and listened to his jazz and tapped his fingers and those sort of things. So that song entitled "Song for My Father" by Horace Silver is one that I dedicated to him years ago. I said, that's the song right there. And so,
what is it about that song in particular?
It reminds me of my dad and his love for jazz, and it's really a nice tune. And so I play it around my dad's time of his death. He died in April, and then he was born in September. So September 14th, I'll listen to a song from my father and, just reminisce those times together, because they were good times. They were good times. Although there was, I'll say that this is the best part about him. He was never angry. He was a really soft-spoken guy. And in that, those memories that we have together, the good and the hard times that he went through, were just grace-filled moments. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very generous of you. Is there a favorite childhood memory that you can share with us?
Wow. So one of my favorite childhood memories is my first job. My first job was probably at the age, other than cleaning my aunt's basement and scrubbing her floors, and the things I learned from that experience I still carry today: how to scrub a floor on your hands and knees, those types of things. But other than that, my real paying first job came probably at maybe 11 or 12 years old, when my friend Raymond and I, so when we talked a little bit about the era that I grew up in, remember I talked about the space eras going on and all these modern things are happening.
Yes.
My first job was Raymond and I had a TV and radio repair business in the community that we would go around and repair people's TVs and their radios. And it was a simple thing, now that as I look back of it, because technically when something went out, it was a tube. This is before transistors. There were tubes that would go bad in the radio or in the television. We would take them down to the corner store that had a tube tester and sold tubes, and we would go down there, test the tubes out, replace them, go put them back in to get paid. So we had a wagon that we would carry around in case we had to transport the TVs and things like that. But that was my first paying job.
That sounds very innovative to do that for people.
It was really Raymond. He was really the high tech guy. And his dad, even back in the late 50s, early 60s, owned a TV repair business on the other side of town. Raymond didn't live with his dad, but we sort of, if we needed some technical expertise, we would call him up and say, "Hey, we got this." And then, so that was one. And I joke about it now, but Raymond and I built rockets. I think technically today they would be known as pipe bombs, but back then, we had countdowns in the park and batteries hooked up, and we would launch these rockets until one made so much noise that when Raymond and I walked back through into my house, we were 2 blocks away at our friend's house, Curtis, and we walked back and this rocket blew up on us. and it made so much noise it scared us. And we went home, and my mother was on the phone, and we lived not too far from the electric plant. And when we walked through the door, my mom took the phone from her ear, and she looked at me and she said, "Did you hear that god awful noise? I think something happened at Detroit Edison." And she looked at my face, and she looked at Raymond's face, and she said, "I'll be right back." She hung up the phone. She said, "It was you two. It was you two. What did you do?" And we had blown up this rocket. So, yeah, so those are two memorable things. And I had to promise at that point that I would never build another rocket, and I didn't. Raymond did, though, but I didn't.
I'm just curious because, you are talking about that era. Was it a common thing for young kids at that time to do to make homemade rockets and things like that because of the space race?
I don't know if that was really that common. Between the two of us, we just had this drive to want to do electronic things like that. We sent off to a company, I can't remember, it was Johnson or something, used to advertise in the back of magazines. And so in Raymond's grandparents' house where he lived, we built our own radio station down the basement that would broadcast to radios up to the house, just things like that.
That's pretty cool. I love that.
We were the nerds of the community.
You could say the nerds. I could also say the geniuses.
You're kind. Thank you.
So I'm now going to ask you about your accomplishments. We've already been hearing about many of them, but I want to know from your perspective, which accomplishment means the most to you personally? And then secondly, which accomplishment is the one that you sense that others are most impressed by?
Okay, I'm going to give you two. The first one is that I told you that I joined the Navy. I retired out of the Navy at 20 years as a Master Chief Gas Turbine technician. Typically, you don't make Master Chief until you have 29 years in the Navy. I made it in 17 years, and retired at 20 years. Usually, folks go past that, but they at the 20-year mark, there wasn't much they could offer me. They say, "Well, gee, you could do this." I said, "No, I don't think I want to do that anymore." So yeah, so that's one thing. Retired as a Master Chief.
Great, congratulations.
Thank you. And so people are amazed when they find out that I retired. First of all, as a Master Chief. I think they talk about 2% of the Navy become Master Chiefs. So that's pretty strong accomplishment. The other one is, after I got out of the Navy, I went to work at a shipyard in New Orleans. And I went to work for the Department of the Navy. I was there 9 years. That was in between getting out of the Navy and becoming a pastor. Or 5 to 7 years after I got there, I became the project manager for the Navy hovercraft program in New Orleans, a place called Textron Marine. We're building the hovercraft. I worked as the Navy side, the project manager for that project. And so we're talking 13 mil per craft, and they built the majority of all the Navy hovercraft there. That one for me was even more than making Master Chief. That here I am, a little young man from the east side of Detroit that is now in charge of this program that built these hovercraft. If you've ever seen one, but they're capable. They float on the water. They lift up off of the water, and they travel 6 inches above the water, and they travel right up onto the beach. And it's just a magnificent piece of machinery. And as you know, if I started working at TVs and excited about that being able to fly across the water at those types of speeds and those sort of things it was just unreal to me that I was able to participate in that.
My only relation to the hovercraft is seeing it in great movies.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's funny because I hear the music. Like there's a certain kind of music that always plays as it's whipping across. It's usually like just before dawn, heading, you know. And anyway, it brings a big smile on my face just because it's always so cool. You know, it's just
Yeah.
only the coolest troops get to, you know, get on. And anyway, that is quite an accomplishment. And to be project manager of that, it you know, I didn't know what your answer was going to be after you talked about being what you guys did as kids, and you said neighborhood nerds, and I said perhaps maybe neighborhood geniuses. And as you are describing these accomplishments, I think I was pretty close there, if not dead on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Evidently, I was prepared for that, in shape for that, and I was in the right place at the right time. And then I gave it all up to go into ministry, which is really interesting. So when I was a pastor, people would say, "Oh, you're in the Navy for 20 years. Were you a chaplain?" And I say, "No, I wasn't a
No.
chaplain. I worked gas turbines, which are jet engines, and I worked on steam turbines." And they're like trying to make this correlation between, so how are you ended up a pastor? And then the hovercraft program, and they're trying to figure it all out. You know, how does this match up? But
Mhm.
yeah,
When did you know that you were called to be a in the ministry?
I started feeling the call to ministry probably in my last 2 years in the Navy. I was stationed in San Diego. My family was in Louisiana. I have a brother-in-law that's been in the ministry for about, oh my goodness, probably 40 years now, getting close to 40 years. And he was at a church in Los Angeles. And I used to travel Long Beach, or excuse me, San Diego up to on the weekends up there, and I was involved there because that became sort of my new church home while I was out in California. And started picking up, feeling the call to ministry, I think, there. And I think he used to do slick things like leave books around, you know, and I say, "What's that?" It's just a book I'm reading. And I started reading the book, and then he'd say something like, "Well, you can have it," you know, and so he really sort of became my mentor. He gave me the advice that you run as long and hard as you can, and when you can't run anymore, you just surrender. And so that's sort of what I did. I that was 85 to 86 that I was out in San Diego, and it was 96. So we're talking almost 10 years before I really started investigating the possibility of going into ministry. Had feelings all along, but sort of suppressed them
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. So
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Um, let's talk about words. What
okay.
is a favorite quote, saying, metaphor, or book?
And this is not because I was a pastor, but this scripture came to me even before I thought about becoming a pastor, and it's taken from the book of Romans. And Paul is getting ready to make a trip to Rome, and he sends out a letter ahead of time. And in this letter, preparing his way, you know, that, hey, I'm coming your way, and you know, just some of the things I want to do. But this is part of what he says, and this has really stood out for me. Like I said, even before I went into ministry, it says, "I'm longing to see you so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, or rather, so that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine." And that has stuck with me because even though I wasn't a pastor, I wasn't, I wasn't in the military, I wasn't a chaplain, but I've always had this longing for being in relationship with people, encouraging people. I've always been an encourager during all those nerdy times I was growing up. I also played like softball and baseball and things like that. So you know how when you choose teams and you got everybody standing on the field and you pick the two captains, are usually the best
Yes.
folks that are, you know, the best players are the captains of the team. Then they start to pick their team. And there's always the one kid that nobody wants to pick, not really good, or they don't think that person is good enough to be on the team. And I would always be nudging the person and say, hey, why don't you pick Robin? Robin would be good on our team. Take Robin. She'll do
Uh-huh.
okay on our team. And so when I look back, and I didn't discover this until after being in the, you know, going through seminary, you have to always write about your faith story and things like that, and those sort of things. And I came to the point to realize that I had these characteristics of being a pastor ingrained in me. When I was in the Navy, I had all these folks that worked for me, but I was always interested in their holisticness. So, how are you doing? How's your family doing? Everything going okay at home? I know it's sort of stressful because we're getting ready to leave and those sort of things. How's things, you know, those types of things that I didn't recognize as being pastoral were the other one. I think I mentioned once before, or maybe it was in another conversation. I talked about living in Louisiana, where they talk about passing time and swapping story, and that's how you build relationships with each other to be able to connect, and it builds. I think it builds compassion amongst people as they hear other people's stories, because
Yeah.
really, in reality, our stories are not that different. Mutually encouraging each other. Not
Yeah.
that I have something that you want, but we both gain from that.
Yes. Actually, I can say every one of the people in my life that I talk to on a, at least weekly basis, um, that's what those conversations are. They're just so mutually edifying, encouraging, and uplifting. And we don't even know, like, we don't come prepared to talk about any one thing, just start talking.
Right.
And it's just awesome what shows up and what gets created from being in dialogue. So I appreciate that. And I do love that phrase, passing time and swapping stories. That's pretty cool.
I like to tell folks that's what we do on Sunday morning. We pass time together and we swap stories about Jesus and each other, and it really is. Seems so
Yeah.
simple sometimes.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to describe going to church.
Yeah.
Um, so, what is a person, moment, conversation, or event that stands out as either changing the trajectory of your life or had a significant impact on your life?
Mm. So one of the things is I told you that my dad was diagnosed when I was young with manic depressive schizophrenia. My parents could not or didn't feel comfortable going to the pastor at the church that we attended. Well, dad wasn't really a churchy person, but there didn't seem to be the relationship there for to be a conversation between my dad and the pastor of the church that my mother and I attended. So they searched for a new church, and they found out about a church where they got a brand new pastor just out of seminary. So this pastor, they said, "Oh, you love him. He's young, and you know that sort of thing." And my parents were young at that time, and so we started going to an AME church. We were in a Baptist church. Started going to an AME church. The pastor there uh, is not well known. His brother is James Cone,
Mhm.
the pastor that Black Liberation Theology, Reverend Dr. James Cone just passed away a couple of years ago. His brother Cecil Cone was the new pastor at that church. That church was the first place that I started hearing about God's love. This pastor um, really sort of reshaped and changed my, you use the word trajectory as far as Christian life. I started listening more. I started
Mhm.
experiencing more. And certainly during that time, I needed much more because of the illness my dad was dealing with. And so that was really a spiritual moment for me that sort of started reshaping some things. And then I was in San Diego attending worship on the weekends in Los Angeles. They were having a fair, and one of the youth came to the fair, and he's walking around, and I looked down, and the whole front of his feet were hanging out of his shoes.
Oh,
The sole was just ripped.
yeah.
And I looked and I said, wow, that's terrible. And I went on about my business. And Sunday morning, he came back to church, and there was a lady there by the name of Shirley that handed him a box. And in that box was a pair of shoes. And I said to myself, how could you not have done something about that? So you're walking around this world noticing that people need something and you're oblivious to it. And that changed my life. And from that point on, I notice people. I have this feeling on whether they're feeling bad about something. And I ask them, how you doing? You know, is there anything I can do to help or what's going on? I can tell you sort of that. It really changed my life forever.
Mm.
Now I have open eyes, and now I can see, and my eyes are there to look for those that need some help.
What is a moment or event that highlights or puts a spotlight on your experience as a Black man in America?
Hmm. As a young man, Boy Scout age, maybe 10, 11 years old, we
Mhm.
had a Boy Scout troop in our neighborhood led by Mr. Gentry. Our neighborhood was a mixed neighborhood, but not a whole lot of money floating around there. He had secondhand everything. You see these Boy Scout troops now that have the trailers towing behind them going somewhere. They had those back in the days. We just didn't have one.
Okay.
And Mr. Gentry would pile us Boy Scouts into the car and take us to different events. So we packed up our stuff one Friday evening, and we went to a Boy Scout jamboree that lasted all week in long there in outside of Detroit, where all the Boy Scouts from the area go, and they do different things and they have competitions. We're out there all weekend long, and we're accelerating in the activities that are going on, starting fires and all sorts of things. And we have one tent. We're all sleeping in the one tent. Pretty much had like one uniform apiece or a uniform and a half.
Yeah.
One pair of pants and two shirts. That type of
Mhm.
thing. So we're out there over the weekend, and we find ourselves at Saturday night that we are tied for first place in the camp for all these things. So they decided that the way to break the tie was in the morning, we would have an inspection, a
Mhm.
uniform inspection. So we said, okay, so what do we do? So we learned all those tricks about folding your clothes neatly, putting them underneath your bunk or underneath your bedroll and sleeping on them to press them. And we took our neckerchiefs off and rolled those out and washed them and laid them out and flattened them out with our hands to make them, sort of straight and everything. We get up Sunday morning, we help each other out, get dressed, and make sure the neckerchiefs are right and the knot is in the right place and everything is ready, and turn
Yeah.
around to the guys back. We're checking each other out. And we go outside in preparation to line up for the inspection. And we look over and two station wagons pull up. And out of the back, excuse me if I get them, I'm 71 years old and I still get emotional about this.
Yeah.
They open up back of the station wagons, and the mothers start offloading pressed iron uniforms on
Oh,
hangers out of the
what?
back of the station wagon. They put them on the white kids, and then they come out for the inspection, and you know who got the most points for the inspection.
Yeah.
It was probably my very first showing of the unfairness that we live by, or that was prevalent in our country. It really was something that just sort of ripped my heart off, because I have this thing about fairness and justice and caring about people, and that was just so uncalled for. So it opened my eyes to the things that and the systems that were in place in our world. But for like a 10, 11-year-old kid, that was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
The other one was when we joined a church in Louisiana, when my wife and I, we weren't pastors, walked into church on Sunday morning, and people got up out of the sanctuary and walked out the front door of the church.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And that was 1980, 81, when we walked in that church and people got up and walked out. And that's also it set the tone.
I'm sorry. I what city was this?
Slidell, Louisiana, 1981. It's a Lutheran church. We were Lutheran, so we.
I mean, you were walking in just to attend.
Yeah, we had moved into the area, and they only had two Lutheran churches. One was our denomination, one was another denomination that that we were not affiliated with at all. And we had been married. My wife had grown up in the Lutheran church. I attended. Yeah. Went through catechism and all sorts of things in the Lutheran church, and walked into that church. And when we walked into the sanctuary, there were people already sitting down. They saw us walk in, and there was just the four of us, my wife, myself, and our two kids. And we walked in, and they stood up and walked right out the front door of the church, probably 4 to 6 people. But it sets for now how we understand that people can be so ugly that call themselves Christians. I mean, it's a reality, especially during this day and age that we live in right now. So,
yes, yeah, absolutely. Have you had any interactions with law enforcement? And if so, is there anything that stands out, or have you not had many? What's your experience been?
I would say limited when I was younger. Although I was raised in Detroit, I attended a junior high school that was integrated the semester before I went there. It was in an all-white area, in the school. The junior high in our area had exceeded the number of students it could carry, so they had to bus kids to the other neighborhood type of thing. Mm-hmm. And we used to get stopped by the police because we walked through all-white neighborhoods.
So, which brings me to this question. Whether she is friend, neighbor, lover, mother, stranger, if the United States were a woman, what would you say to her?
I would say that if she was a woman, that she's neglecting some of her children, that she's dismissing their needs to help them to reach their potential. I think one of the things as a parent that I try to hold up was, and I would tell my son, it's my responsibility as a parent to help you reach your potential, mm-hmm. and to call you on it when you're not. If I see America as a woman or a parent to, a mother to its children, then there's too many of the children being neglected. That somehow you you know how they say in a family, that you love all your children, and you attend to them differently because they have different personalities and things, but you love them all. And somehow America is not loving all of her children.
So Ham, what is love to you?
Because I'm looking at this in a way that I try to live my life, and that's caring for a whole person, an authentic concern for the well-being of people. So when you talk about love, I love my wife, and I love my children. And actually, my son told me one time, he says, "Dad, you tell everybody that you love them. And I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, I thought it was only me, and Stephanie. And I realized, wait a minute, he was telling so-and-so that he loved, because I do. I truly do love people. And in walking life's journey with them through their ups and downs, that is not only during the good times or not only during the bad times, through all the life's experiences. And I think that's what has really drawn me to ministry, is being able to be intimately involved in people's lives, from births to deaths. That is honor. That is what I hold as a true honor, to be able to walk with people during those times, and them trust me to walk with them during those times. So
There's something about the way that you say it or maybe it's just that your heart is coming through it, but I can feel that you hold it as a privilege and an honor, and that just to be around you is a safe space.
Yeah, which is interesting. At the church we were at, that was the motto. This is a safe place to explore your faith and to heal. In our house, our home is that way. We just had we call them play children. One of our play children, who is at Duke Divinity School, it was out of school, and from here in Jacksonville, but we're up in North Carolina at Duke, and so she just spent about 6 weeks with us here at our house, because we said, this is always a place for people to come, be restored for whatever period of time that they need to be restored, and get some things together and that sort of thing. So, yeah, so safe place is important to us.
Yeah, well, it definitely comes across. Is there anything that we haven't covered that about you, about your life, that challenges any of the stereotypes that are out there about Black men? I mean, there's so much already there. For example, just being married 50 years, even though that's not as uncommon as people might think, it's just not something that we think of when we think of Black men, unfortunately. So is there anything else that we haven't covered?
Um, I think the one stereotype that I see is a challenge, that people don't think they can learn anything from Black men, that they don't have anything to teach us, which is not true. You can tell that through your podcast and your interactions and hearing the stories. Um, and so I have that the stereotype is that they may learn something from me, learn about me and my culture, and I get a chance to learn something about myself in the midst of that.
I love that you said that about listening to Black men, because I didn't know when I started this the richness that was going to come out. Like, I just wanted to capture Black men's lives. And, I could say that I'm embarrassed by it, but I'm not. Like, I'll just be straight. Like, I wasn't anticipating hearing just wisdom after wisdom after wisdom. It just wasn't something I was thinking about. And maybe I wouldn't have thought that either, in some other group, but I have a feeling, for example, when people listen to a podcast about women entrepreneurs, they're like, oh, what do women entrepreneurs have to say? Oh, I want to learn what they have, right? And it is very telling that, with Black men, there isn't this automatic, ooh, what do they have to say?
Right.
And this podcast, I think, is going to shatter anyone who hears this. That stereotype will be shattered.
Yeah. So I got to tell you one more story.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, because this has to do with what you're talking about, it's this idea that we tend to paint pictures and put stories together for people that we know absolutely nothing about. I want to tell you my Kenzo Gardner story. Kenzo Gardner was a young man that I worked with when I lived in New Orleans, and I would go to Houston a lot. He lived in Houston. Kenzo was half Japanese and half American, right?
Mm-hmm.
His name was Kenzo Gardner. So I drew this picture of Kenzo Gardner. Oh, Kenzo Gardner's mom is Japanese. Dad is probably a white. Maybe he had been in the military and went to Japan and found this woman and married her, right? We're at this event and Kenzo says, "Hey, Mr. Ham," they used to call me because I wasn't a pastor then. "Mr. Ham," he says, "I want you to meet my dad." And I said, "Wow, great. Where is he, Kenzo?" He says, "It's right behind you. Turn around." So I turn around and there's a Japanese man. Turns out
Right.
that Kenzo's dad was adopted by some white people. He's Japanese. He was
Wow.
adopted by white people named Gardner. Mom is white.
Uh-huh.
And that was another trajectory change for me, that I stopped building stories around people because we anticipate. So if somebody sees me and they look at me and they, oh, da 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 da, and they build a story about who I am, and
Yes.
then they discover that's nowhere near who I am. And so that was
Yeah.
another lesson.
Absolutely. And so I love that you said that, because I could see, you're walking down the street, no one knows, like, this guy, what you've done. And it's not even about that it's the hovercraft, even though that is a significant achievement, but whatever that is you were doing, you know what I'm saying? We
Yeah.
just don't see
You
people for
just don't
who
know.
they are. It's almost like it's this natural thing that humans do because we're designed to survive. And so our brains have designed themselves to recognize threat and then also to recognize patterns, right? And so it just seems so easy. It's just that unfortunately that habit that we inherited, it doesn't really serve us when it comes to interacting with people in a multicultural society.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now that we've had this conversation, Ham, what, if anything, did you get from participating in the interview?
I think, first of all, I learned a long time ago, people really do like to talk about themselves. And so this was a great opportunity for me to be able to share what things are important to me uh, through my upbringing, and then how did those things that I lived through my life bring me to this point, or how do they interact? How do they mesh together? This whole idea of how our lives are meshed together and how they really do interconnect in different ways, and how we live that out, the things of our past that bring us into what we use in the future. It's just amazing, and I continue to beam in that as I rethought about some of these things that of my past, um, that have flowed into who I am today and made me who I am today. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's one of the things I love about being in conversation, because I'll think that I know what was happening in my life because I remember it and I know the order that it happened in. And then I'll be in a conversation and suddenly I'll see, oh my gosh. So when that happened and that happened, that was, if it weren't for those two things, I'd have never taken that step.
Right.
And then it just, you wonder, it's like, okay, wait, I know there's a divine plan, but at the same time, like, that just seems too
Yeah.
random. So anyway, um, so Ham, I just want to thank you for spending some time and sharing and passing time and swapping stories through and throughout the interview. But I just want to acknowledge the huge heart that you are, and even more than that, it's like you are walking fellowship. Like, that is just who you are, is walking fellowship.
Thank you.
So thank
Thank
you.
Thank you for listening. As you can hear, you do not want to miss any of these brothers. Make sure you subscribe. You can find more at our website, 365brothers.com, 365brothers.com. This is Robin Shine. To listen is to love.